This is the 2020 iPad Air, which packs the A14 Bionic. If you're unfamiliar, the A14 Bionic is the first 5nm chip. It consists of a 6-core CPU and a 4-core GPU. The 2020 iPad Air packs 4GB of RAM and is available with 64 or 256GB of internal storage. This is the 2020 iPad Pro, which packs the A12Z Bionic. Unlike the A14, the A12Z is a 7nm chip. It consists of an 8-core CPU and an 8-core GPU. The 2020 iPad Pro packs 6GB of RAM and is available in 128, 256, 512, and 1TB storage configurations. Before we get too involved in the comparison, let me tell you more about this video's sponsor, Paperlike. If you're into graphic designing, drawing, sketching, and all things creative on your iPad using an Apple Pencil, then you really should consider picking up a Paperlike screen protector. Not only does it do things like protect your display, reduce fingerprints and smudges, and cut back on glares, it provides a unique experience similar to writing on a piece of paper. It does this using nanodots technology, which basically means that there are hundreds of microbeads spread all over a Paperlike screen protector. These microbeads add a little bit of texture and create subtle vibrations to the Apple Pencil, which in return simulates the feeling of writing on paper. They also provide a grippier texture for the tip of the Apple Pencil, so filling in fine details, whether you're sketching or writing a note, is easier and more natural. I'm a huge fan of Paperlike. I've been using them for a while and I can't recommend them enough. I'm rocking one on my iPad Air and I have another on my 2018 iPad Pro. No matter the iPad you're currently using, Paperlike has a screen protector for you. Make sure to check out the link in the description below and grab yours today. All right, so let's talk Pro versus Air. The difference in price between these two tablets is relatively substantial, even more so depending on your region. You're looking at a starting price of $599 for the Air and $799 for the 11-inch iPad Pro. I currently have the 12.9-inch iPad Pro, which I'll be using for reference. However, the specs of the 11-inch and 12.9-inch are identical. So what do you get for an extra $200? Right off the bat, double the storage. This is probably one of the most important factors for an average consumer. Stepping up the storage configuration on the iPad Air to 256 will set you back $749 versus $899 on the iPad Pro, which brings the price gap between these two tablets a little bit closer. You also get double the GPU cores on the iPad Pro, 2 additional CPU cores, and 2 additional gigabytes of RAM. So what does all of this mean for performance? Let's find out. Here's a quick breakdown of a couple benchmarks, including Geekbench and Antutu. You can see the iPad Air is faster in single core thanks to its higher CPU clock speed, but the multi-core obviously is going to go to the iPad Pro. Looking at the compute test, which focuses more on the GPU, the iPad Air came out on top again, which is really interesting considering it has half the amount of cores as the iPad Pro. But as you'll see in my video editing test, benchmarks don't necessarily equate to real-life performance gains. The iPad Pro also scores higher for the Antutu test, including higher scores in CPU, GPU, and RAM. Now let's run a few CPU-Z performance tests and see how they compare against each other. I have CPU Dasher X pulled up on both iPads. This is a CPU-Z app. If you want to know what it looks like, that's the icon right there. And you can download it, it's a free app. I went under performance, and these are the tests that we can run in order to see how each of these iPads compare against each other. Let's go ahead and start with the frequency test, which is going to test out the clock speed of each iPad in terms of its CPU. Go ahead and run it on the Pro and then on the Air. So the iPad Air is running at 3 megahertz, whereas the iPad Pro is basically 2.5 megahertz. Let's go ahead and back up. Run the database test at the same exact time. 1, 2, 3. And you could see this finished a little bit quicker, but not by much. It also has more in terms of the CPU load. Let's go ahead and go back. Now we're going to run a few FPS tests or frames per second test. This should cap out at 120 over here and 60 over here due to the display being capped at 120 Hertz versus 60 Hertz. So we're going to start with the render WebGL. 1, 2, 3. And this one finished maybe a hair quicker, but not that much faster. You can see it's capped at 120 and this one is capped at 61. So a little bit above 60 Hertz, but really it's probably an app malfunction. But you can see the CPU load is definitely higher on the iPad Air versus the iPad Pro. So let's go ahead and go back. Now we're gonna run a render simple 3D object test. 1, 2, 3, and the iPad Air came out on top. Definitely a little bit faster. It also has more in terms of the CPU load, but not by much. And if we move this around, you can see it maintains between 50 and 60 frames per second, whereas the iPad Pro maintains 120 frames per second the entire time. Really impressive. Let's go ahead and go back. Now we're gonna run a render complex 3D object. 1, 2, 3. And once again, the iPad Air rendered it out quicker, but if we start moving it around, no, it's actually staying at 61 frames per second, so that's pretty impressive. The CPU load is definitely a little bit higher over here, so let's go over to the iPad Pro, and you can see we have a decrease in frames per second. It has dropped down to 72, but it also has a lower CPU load. Regardless, they're both running really good. Let's go ahead and go back. Now we're gonna run an algorithm test. We're gonna run the matrix multiplication test first. 1, 2, 3. Pretty much even. I don't know. Let's do that again. That was really fast. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, that's really close. This is maybe a hair quicker, but I don't even know. That might have been like an issue with how fast I pressed one over the other. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, they're pretty much even. Let's go ahead and back up. Now we're gonna run the sort algorithms test. 1, 2, 3. This one is definitely going faster. So the iPad Air is a little bit faster when it comes to this test by quite a bit, actually. I mean, this is looking to be, oh, no, they finished at the same exact time. Wow, that was crazy. This went from like 33% all the way to 100. This was at a little bit above 60 to 100, and it's kind of crazy. But if you look at the milliseconds here, you can see this is a little bit faster for the most part. But yeah, so that was a quick CPU Z benchmark test, or tests, depending on how you want to look at it. And like I said, you're more than welcome to download this app in the App Store for free and run these tests yourself. And if you do decide to do that, let me know in the comment section what your results were like. In real world use, you won't notice much difference between these two performance-wise when it comes to like 99% of tasks. Photo editing on both is great. I've edited 100 megapixel RAW photos on the iPad Pro, and I've also edited the same photos on the iPad Air. The iPad Pro is a little more fluid, but it's hard to tell whether it's because of the internal specs or if it's because of the 120 Hz display. What I will say is that the iPad Pro does get a little bit warmer to the touch when rendering out the edits. The same thing can be said when drawing, sketching, writing, and anything in between when it comes to using the Apple Pencil. Both are great, but due to the higher refresh rate of the Pro, it just seems smoother. Just make sure to pick up a paper-like screen protector if you're getting it in with the Apple Pen. Video editing is a different story. When exporting the same exact 2-minute timeline, which consists of multiple 4K 60 frames per second clips from the Galaxy Note 20 Ultra and the iPhone 12 Pro to a 4K 60 frames per second H.264 video with the highest export settings in LumaFusion, the iPad Pro was 16 seconds faster. This equates to an 8-second speed improvement for every 1 minute of video being exported. How significant this is comes down to you and what you plan to do with your iPad. But when you start looking at a 10-minute export, it's an improvement of around 1.5 minutes, which could add up over time. Gaming on both the iPad Pro and the Air is pretty much even when it comes to hardware performance. Where the Air might have a small advantage due to the newer architecture, you'll never see it due to the display being capped at 60 Hz and the game selection that's currently available in the App Store. Once we start getting more demanding titles and really venture more into AR gaming, I think that's when you're gonna see a difference when it comes to performance of the A12Z versus the A14. That said, thanks to the 120 Hz display on the iPad Pro, it's definitely a better gaming experience, but since we're strictly talking about raw performance, there's really no difference. So in conclusion, the iPad Air is a very nice balance between cost to performance, which I'm sure you know by now. For the majority of people looking to invest in a high-end iPad without breaking the bank, I think it's perfect. However, I would not go as far as saying the 2020 iPad Air is an iPad Pro killer. When comparing the equivalent storage options, for an additional $150, you are gaining several performance enhancements on the Pro, and depending what you're trying to accomplish, these enhancements could come in handy. Not to mention, there's other added benefits like the much better display and Face ID. If you're serious about choosing an iPad as a laptop replacement and tend to do more creative work, I would suggest looking at the iPad Pro over the Air. The extra RAM could potentially help you out when working with multiple layers in Photoshop or bouncing between LumaFusion and GarageBand, as well as multitasking, of course. For everything else, the iPad Air is a stellar choice and one that I definitely recommend. I can't wait to see where Apple takes the A14 in the future, whether it's the A14X or Z, since the 5nm design is definitely the future of mobile computing. What do you think of the iPad Air? Would you choose it over the iPad Pro? Let me know down below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like, subscribe for more videos just like this, and take care of yourselves, and I will see your sweet, smiling faces in the next video.